Joseph Telchin, former director of the Latin American program, and it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker this afternoon. He's the Foreign Minister of Chile, Heraldo Muñoz Valenzuela. And had he been delayed, I was prepared to extend my introduction, but I'll be as brief as protocol will allow. Since I've known the minister for nearly 30 years, almost much of his adult life. But we met once at a conference while he was still moving back and forth between Chile and the United States, where he finished his degree at the University of Denver. And we met at a conference actually in Caracas, at the Universidad Central of Caracas, talking about international affairs. But Heraldo Muñoz and I have worked together on academic projects. He is, as I've indicated, a PhD in international relations and politics. But there's a quality to his work which has Zelig-like qualities. That is, he shows up at important historic moments. I won't talk about the book we edited together as an historic moment, but when the transition to democracy occurred in Chile, Heraldo went to Washington as Chilean ambassador to the OAS, where he managed to broker the creation of what is today called the Charter of Democracy, the Carta Democrática, which remains, however controversial, however imperfect, one of the major steps in forging a tighter and broader community of nations in the hemisphere. Then he went to Brazil as ambassador, and while there, though he didn't create the Doha round, there is in my archive a picture from the front page of the New York Times with Heraldo toasting with, I assume, champagne. It looks like a champagne flute. Toasting his buddy, the Brazilian representative, Celso Laffer. And there they are, recording the successful completion of the Doha round. And then he goes on to be deputy minister in the government of Lagos, deputy foreign minister, head of the cabinet, minister secretary general of the government. And then he goes off to the United Nations, where he succeeds our friend and ambassador Juan Gabriel Valdez, who had been there. And while Heraldo is while Minister Muñoz is in New York, puts the final touches together for what is called MINUSTA, which in the hemisphere is one of the most important activities of the United Nations in Haiti, when Ambassador Valdez then goes back to direct that. And now he is his nation's foreign minister. So it's an extraordinary career, diplomatic career. Along the way, a couple of major books, not just the one he and I edited, but his experience during the dictatorship, which he called In the Shadow of the Dictator, a gripping narrative. And then more recently, based on his work he did at the request of the Secretary General of the United Nations, Getting Away with Murder, the story of Bhutto's assassination. Well, that's enough. A man of extraordinary talents, and a pleasure to listen to today.
Well, thank you, Joe, and thank you, Cindy, for inviting me for this 40th anniversary of the Latin American program of the Wilson Center. It seems like yesterday when 40 years ago, Abe Lowenthal invited me to be assistant director of the program that was beginning to emerge at the Wilson Center. And he interviewed me. And he says, the first thing, well, you know, I work really hard. And I said, that's no problem for me if I work hard as well. No, but I work really hard, so you are doing writing your PhD at Brookings, so you have to quit that. So it's either the dissertation or you work for me. And I said, then the answer is simple, it's my dissertation, I said. And from then on, A has reminded me a couple of times that this is the only person that has ever refused him an offer of a job. I'm very proud to have done that because I completed my PhD. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to write all those books that Joe makes propaganda about. But I've been really privileged to have a relationship with people like Abe, like Joe, like Cindy, and so many of you here that are part of these 40 years of the Latin American program, the Wilson Center. And it is also an opportunity to be able to explain from the point of view of Chile, of course, how we see these new trends in integration, regional integration, and I go further than that, how we see this difficult world that we're moving in from a few months ago, and perhaps years, because it's not, what we're seeing is not so sudden. It's been in the making for a while. But let me begin by talking about Chilean foreign policy. I think that Chile's foreign policy passes through one of the best periods in recent or modern history. And let me just give you some snippets of what that means. Chile has become a world leader in ocean conservation. We organized in Valparaiso our ocean conference in 2015, which was a hugely successful event that contributed to put the issue of ocean conservation in the global agenda by linking ocean conservation to the combat of climate change. Because until then, in the discussion of the SDGs of Agenda 2030, ocean conservation was not a matter of very much attention, even though ocean conservation allows, it's a natural sink for greenhouse gases, therefore it's a fundamental instrument to keep us alive. And by creating more marine protected areas in Chile than in all of our history, 46% of our economic zone is now covered by marine protected areas, and that has made us a world leader. And we have advocated ocean conservation in a famous declaration now, because of the ocean, together with France and Monaco. So this is one of the issues that I wanted to mention. But Chile has become also a leader in South-South cooperation, particularly in Central America and the Caribbean. In fact, we have jumped to almost $30 million of cooperation to Central America and the Caribbean between 2015 and the present. Chile was an accompanying country in the peace process between the government and the FARC, as you know, and now we have about 60 personnel on the ground on the verification process, and we have become guarantors of the talks with the smaller guerrilla group, the ELN. And after 27 years since the recovery of democracy, Chileans will finally be able to vote in presidential elections abroad, which was a task that the foreign ministry had to develop after a constitutional reform and implementing legislation. We already, in fact, had Chileans voted for primaries a couple of months ago. And because of our defense of democracy and human rights, we have become involved as one of the facilitating countries in the Venezuelan crisis. This is an issue that, of course, is very close to to all of us here, and we hope that that has a positive outcome. We are hoping that both sides can resume talks to be able to achieve a restoration of the democratic order in Venezuela. But I'm here to talk about the achievements in regional integration, or lack thereof, in regional integration and trade. And in a very difficult world context, as I mentioned before, because many years ago, Dean Acheson wrote that wonderful book about the post-Cold War, on the post-war period, present at the creation, and Foreign Affairs just published an edition, the last one that I saw, that was entitled Present at the Destruction. And it seems that there is a destruction going on, and it has been going on for a while. The Brexit vote, President Donald Trump's election, the withdrawal of the United States from the TPP and from the Paris Agreement, all of this mark, I think, the beginning of a new era. And it appears to be an expression of a new age of citizen dissatisfaction, of discomfort with the asymmetrical fruits of globalization, with a balance of winners and losers stemming from the unstoppable technological innovation process. When foreign ministers or prime ministers visit Chile and they ask me, how's Chile going? And I begin saying, well, there's a lot of dissatisfaction. People complaining in the streets, political parties being heavily criticized, political leaders the same, and they all stop me and they all say the same thing is happening in my country. I have had no different situation where I begin explaining that there is massive dissatisfaction, even anger, where my interlocutor doesn't tell me that it is the same case in their own countries. And despite the fact that the opening of trade, interconnectivity, and technological acceleration actually moved millions of people out of poverty and created a new middle strata. According to the World Bank, the number of people living below the poverty level fell from 35% in 1990 to 10.7% in 2013, despite the fact that during that time, the population of the world had increased by almost 2 billion. However, the perception is that the benefits of all this have gone disproportionately to the privileged few, creating a growing number of malcontents. And Latin America is the case because it's a breeding ground for malcontents, despite the fact that we have probably 70 million less poor in the region thanks to this expansion of trade. But now these people are very vulnerable because of the crisis, and because of the fact that Latin America continues to lead inequality indexes, despite the efforts to revert the situation. According to ECLAC, the Gini coefficient in 2015 showed an average value of 0.47 for 17 Latin American countries, a level considered relatively high. Although the index has shown some progress until 2012, the rate of decline fell during the last 2 years. Today, 11 of the 20 most unequal countries in the world are in Latin America and the Caribbean. And in parallel, we have experienced this economic slowdown and a steep fall in the prices of most commodities, creating, in some cases, not only slow growth, but even recession. And considering the much tougher macroeconomic environment and the belt-tightening that has happened in some countries, all of this has placed social gains at risk and has made then for more stressful political conditions. Fortunately, there are recent increases in regional exports, but they do not constitute a firm trend yet. China's new position as a main market for our region's goods and its economic shift from investment in infrastructure to investment in consumption is partly responsible for the end of the commodities boom, even though Chile cannot complain because we continue to expand trade with China, which is Chile's first trade partner, as it is in the case of most countries anymore. So that most forecasters agree that in 2017, Latin America will register modest economic growth of 1 to 1.5%, far behind the growth of other regions, some of them like Asia that are growing at fast rates. And to make things worse, in Latin America and the Caribbean, we're witnessing the frightening impact of climate change, such as the rising sea levels and warmer oceans, which scientists agree make storms like Irma, Harvey, or Maria far more destructive than it would have been in the previous decades. And natural disasters have become a particularly burdensome matter for middle-income regional countries because due to their income per capita, access to development cooperation now is severely restricted. And Chile and other middle-income countries have pointed out the blatant contradiction that there is between the spirit of the 2030 agenda, which is a multidimensional agenda, and the fact that development is measured solely by income per capita. And when you talk to prime ministers from the Caribbean, they say, what does it matter whether I have a middle-income country when it is wiped out in a single hurricane? How do you measure development by income per capita? And I'm out of the possibility of getting donors assistance because I've been graduated, because I have, $15,000 or $10,000 income per capita. And this is a truly, I think, a matter that needs to be rethought. And that's why we led an initiative to write to the donor countries of the OECD, in a letter signed by the Foreign Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, the Foreign Minister of Uruguay, and myself, so that they reconsider and rethink what does, in the end, development mean beyond income per capita. But let me turn back to regional integration, which is the main subject of my talk. Regional integration has been probably one of the most important part of the Latin American discourse throughout history. And achievements often have been scarce, and geopolitical rivalries tend to endure. And during the most recent years, Latin America and the Caribbean have experienced more political and ideological diversity than just about any other time that one can think of. And the tensions are reflected in a weakened set of regional organizations like UNASUR, like SICA, and CELAC. But Chile believes that regional integration and open markets are fundamental for creating the right conditions for more innovation, diversification, and integration to value chains. And they're fundamental, therefore, for national economic growth. Chile's integration into the international community has been characterized by an open trade policy. And this policy has boosted trade and allowed for increased investment flows, which has guaranteed a sustained economic growth. If you were to measure it by income per capita, we went from $5,800 per capita income in 1990 to almost $24,000 in 2016. More importantly, poverty has decreased from 39% in 1990 to 11.7% in the same period. Today, Chile has 26 trade agreements with 64 countries, representing over 60% of the world's population and over 85% of the global GDP. We are associate members of Mercosur. We collaborate closely with CARICOM, with SICA, and of course, we're members of the Pacific Alliance, Chile, Peru, Colombia, and Mexico, the cornerstone of our approach to the region. And we believe that the regional market is the most appropriate for export diversification. It's the most important market for the export of manufacturers and services, and the most important market for small and medium-sized enterprises. In addition, our region is a natural space for the growth of the multi-Latinas enterprises and the creation of multinational production chains. And in fact, investment crisscrosses the region in a sort of a silent way. There's more integration than meets the eye. Chile has $120 billion invested abroad, 80% in Latin America, so that business people begin caring about their neighbors, begin caring about their stability, because their money is in the countries of the region. Chile has about $32 billion invested in Brazil. So that Brazil matters to Chile a lot more for many historical reasons, but also because of this linkage. And so that there's more than meets the eye. There are more roads, there are more tunnels, there are more pipelines and connectivity than ever before. And sometimes that private investment that crisscrosses our region has stimulated government action, has gone before government action. However, intra-regional trade continues to be low. In Europe, it's 69%, in Asia, 52%, in North America, 50%, but in South and Central America, it's only 26%. And this is important, even though, I remind you, it's qualitatively better because we export our value-added products and our manufacturers and services to the region increasingly. It's easier to compete in the region than in more sophisticated markets. But it is clear that we have some very important tasks outstanding. We have to boost productivity, increase innovation, adapt our economies to new technologies, and diversify our exports. From the outset of our present administration, our President Michelle Bachelet, we became concerned about the clear political and economic distancing that existed between the Pacific Alliance and the Mercosur. And we decided to pose an idea, a concept of convergence in diversity. That is, to engage in a dialogue to explore common action despite the differences between the two integration schemes. There was a great deal of skepticism. I heard people saying that I was proposing the merger of two different schemes, that did not make sense. I heard that Chile was opting for a rapprochement with lesser partners that would slow or if not stop the Pacific Alliance's progress, and a series of other criticisms. But we insisted, arguing that Chile has strong interests in the Pacific but also in the Atlantic, and that the region needed a stronger voice and larger trade flows. And we did not want a political divide between the Pacific Alliance and the Mercosur. Things turned out quite well in the end. The Pacific Alliance has become our regional integration hub towards the Pacific Rim, and also a bridge towards our Atlantic neighbors. The ministers of foreign relations and of trade of both the Pacific Alliance and Mercosur met in Buenos Aires in April, while Chile presided the Pacific Alliance and Argentina presided the Mercosur, and we achieved what had been elusive. We achieved a concrete plan of action, or a roadmap, very concrete, that constitutes, I think, the only palpable evidence in integration between two different regional economic blocs. The action plan includes trade facilitation, regional value chains, custom cooperation, trade promotion and SMEs, non-tariff barriers, facilitation of trade and services. Moreover, each objective has its corresponding implementation activities and dates when they have to be carried out. So some may say this was only because there were changes in government in Mercosur, but let me remind you that the interest in what we were saying in Chile began, in the case of Brazil at least, with the Dilma Rousseff government. The interest in getting closer to the Pacific Alliance, and in fact, we did do a ministerial meeting of both schemes, the Mercosur and the Pacific Alliance, long before the present governments in Argentina and in Brazil. But things changed quite significantly following the election of President Trump because of the departure of the US from the TPP, in which we participated actively. So what did we do? Chile decided to take a risk, and I called all my colleagues. I'm Minister of Foreign Relations and Trade. So I called all of the foreign ministers and ministers of trade of the TPP, and we said, are you interested in meeting? Why don't you come to Chile and we see what happens with the TPP? And we decided that it would be a good idea to call them a Pacific Alliance. And all of my colleagues from the Pacific Alliance agreed, and they all showed up. And all of the other ministers also attended. It was something that we put up in a little bit over a month. And we also invited not only the 12 members of the TPP, the original signatories, including the United States. But we also added Colombia because we were inviting as a Pacific Alliance, and we invited China and South Korea, important partners for all of those concerned. And out of that meeting came out the following. The 11 remaining signatories of the TPP agreed to continue exploring the implementation of the TPP. And in fact, we've been meeting, and only a couple of days ago was the last meeting of the 11, which have decided to go through freezing some items that we have to determine yet, but understanding that we will not reopen a negotiation. No renegotiating the TPP. We want the high standards. But there are some issues that some countries accepted only because the United States was going to be in. If the United States is not in, then we put it aside. And this is the way, at the point at which we are right now. And at the November APEC meeting, we will make a decision on the definite road forward. And since the Trump administration decided to renegotiate the NAFTA agreement, and we trust a positive outcome for all three countries involved, of course, the eventual signature of a TPP 11 would provide more flexibility and economic alternatives for Mexico, and also for Peru and Chile, the Latin American signatories of the original TPP. But that was not only the only important result of the Viña del Mar meeting that we called. The members of the Pacific Alliance made a qualitative jump. We decided that we could be an alternative platform to the TPP for regional integration in the Asia-Pacific region, so that it wasn't easy. Among ourselves, the 4 countries, we had to negotiate that. We decided to negotiate as a bloc free trade agreements that would be of high standards and in relative short periods of time. We said we don't want negotiations of years, but rather months. And we proposed that to some of our partners in the Asia-Pacific region, and in Cali when we met, we decided that the 4 countries that would begin negotiating with the Pacific Alliance would be Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and Singapore. And in October, we begin the negotiations. This is a major step forward because these countries, once the negotiation is ended, will become associate members of the Pacific Alliance. We already have 54, I think it is, observer nations in the Pacific Alliance. And we wanted to differentiate to those that were really interested, and the way to differentiate is you negotiate a free trade agreement with us. High standards, in short times, and maybe we can become an alternative platform. In fact, there are many countries that have approached us to say, we want to negotiate a free trade agreement with you, with the Pacific Alliance. We have our work cut out for the next few months, so we will have to say to some of those countries, you're going to have to wait your turn. But it looks like we may end up with something very interesting in the end. So that's, I think the Pacific Alliance will become a powerful alternative platform. Not only to the TPP that may end up going as a TPP 11, but also to the FTAAP in the context of APEC, and to the RCEP, which is the integration scheme where the ASEAN countries, India, China, Japan, Korea, New Zealand, and Australia are involved. A very interesting experience. Furthermore, the Pacific Alliance and ASEAN have been also negotiating, but in a different way, a framework of cooperation between the 2 integration mechanisms. We met several times, and we already have some ideas of priorities. In some, I think the Pacific Alliance has proven a success. To the additional protocol that freed 94% of all trade among the 4 members, we should mention what I just said, this qualitative jump forward, this negotiation of free trade agreements with countries in the Asia-Pacific region. And it may not be just Asia-Pacific, because Uruguay has said, we want to negotiate a free trade agreement with you. They said it publicly, so that's why I say it. And there are other countries that not of the Asia-Pacific region that are telling the Pacific Alliance that they want to negotiate with us. But aside from that, I think one should mention the implementation of the Entrepreneurial Capital Fund, the creation of the Pacific Alliance Investment Facilitation Initiative, the integration of the equity markets of the 4 countries, the so-called MILA, and the consolidation of the student and academic mobility platform, among others. And this is very significant because there's about 1,500 scholarships for students going back and forth among the 4 countries. And this is a good complement to what we're doing at the economic level. But we must also persist in our bilateral approaches to economic integration. And that's why Chile negotiated a free trade agreement with Uruguay. We already had an agreement under ALADI with them, an ASE. But this is a free trade agreement. And the interesting thing is that we put progressive chapters, like a chapter on the empowerment of women, so as to allow that increased trade involves women entrepreneurs and give opportunity to those that haven't had access to loans, access to markets, to the assistance that we generally provide to men. And it was so successful, this chapter, that when we modernized our long-standing and successful trade agreement with Canada, very recently, during a visit to to Canada, to Prime Minister Trudeau's country, we introduced also a gender chapter. Except the Canadians made us improve it and said, but let's put a chapter, but let's put a mechanism to do a follow-up so that we comply with what we're saying in the chapter on gender. And besides that, we're close to concluding our modernization process of the trade agreement with China. We agreed to update our trade deal with South Korea, the first one the South Koreans ever signed. That was more than a decade ago. And we expect to sign at the end of this year a new free trade agreement with Indonesia. And at a different level, we hope to close in about 6 months, hopefully, the modernization of our association agreement with the EU. Once all EU members give the mandate to conclude negotiations. This has been approved by the Commission, but each individual country of the European Union must give their mandate for the actual negotiation to conclude. Lastly, and this is something that is always important in the region because I mentioned it at the beginning, integration with our neighbors. What about that? That has been and is a key goal of our foreign policy. And I think we have to take advantage of the possibility to cooperate fully because there are no benefits for Chile from this instability or lack of progress of our immediate neighbors. So with Peru, relations have focused on a common future agenda. We are working closely on a number of fronts, including energy, possibility of a pilot program of integration of electricity between Tacna and Arica, migration, security, trade, investment, which already exists quite a bit between the two countries. And last July, for the first time in our history, we held a binational cabinet of ministers. 18 ministers of the cabinet from Chile, 20 from Peru, and both our presidents guiding our work. And on that occasion, we signed 15 agreements, and we decided to advance on more than 120 common projects among the various ministries that we are sitting next to each other. With Bolivia, things have been less than optimal. What can I say? Despite acrimony, Chile has carried out what I call silent integration. And let me tell you what that means. That in fact, throughout these years, trade and investment has increased with Bolivia. There's a new Bolivian airline authorized to operate in Chile. This happened only a couple of months ago. Bolivian students, mostly graduate ones, attend our universities, many with Chilean government scholarships. Chile provides cooperation to Bolivia in the medical field. And Bolivians continue to migrate and settle in our country. And at the governmental level, in fact, last July, our Joint Border Commission met for the first time since 2013. And technical authorities have continued to meet to solve concrete problems. And with Argentina, we have forged a very intense relationship. Sometimes I speak more to my Argentinian colleague than to my own wife. As close it is, the relationship. Because we're involved in so many strategic points of action between the two countries and in joint regional initiatives, of course, including physical connectivity, energy. Chile is exporting energy to Argentina, but we will receive energy from Argentina as well. These swaps are difficult to imagine when Argentina cut us the gas many years ago after we have built a pipeline over the Andes. And we had to begin importing gas from Malaysia, from Trinidad and Tobago. Then we began selling gas and electricity, but we have agreed that we're going to buy from Argentina because sometimes there are surpluses that can be traded. And we are finishing this very moment a trade liberalization agreement between the two countries. One of the good things, of course, the press takes immediately very concrete issues. Roaming will be free between the two countries. That's the news. It's not all the other very important things that we were able to put in the agreement, but roaming will be free. So, and we will sign this agreement between Chile and Argentina probably in early November. And more importantly, we have launched a 2030 strategic forum between the two countries. This is very interesting because our idea is, how do we think the future together? How do we make it so that Argentina and Chile will imagine what will happen in almost 15 years and will try to face in a common fashion those challenges that we have ahead of us. And we put up a tremendous group of government officials, members of parliament, intellectuals that are doing a really fine work, and that they will present us with their outcome very soon. So all of these actions, plus our participation in APEC, I think make us to be a strong promoter of economic integration in not only Latin America, but in Asia Pacific and globally. And these are some of the new directions of the present and future of regional and global integration. It will never be easy. The world is not easy, but really we have no other option, in my view, but to work together for solving common challenges. Thank you.
Is there a break for the panel, or should we simply?
We'll just invite the next panel out, I think.
Oh, all right.
Without people getting.
The panelists know who they are.
Yes.
And invite them to join us, and thank you, Mr. Minister,
Thank you.
for coming and for your
Appreciate
talk. See the space.
Sí. Sí, sí. Okay. Yeah. Muy bien.
Sí. Sí, sí, ya acá las tenemos.
This is an opportunity to escape wish.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's going to be more than an hour and a half. So there's an opportunity
No, probably I'll be down there.
Hello, Caroline.
Thank you. I want to thank Cindy and Paulo for letting me come home again. I was at the Wilson Center 30 years ago. I also thank Abe for having created this program. And in memory, I want to thank Richard Morse, who was the director when I was a fellow, and not in memory, Joe Touching, for having kept the program alive after Morse died. Our issue is understanding changing patterns of regional integration. And my mission is very simple, because you all know our panelists. I'm just going to give the word to them, and they will talk to us what they know about this issue. The first one is José Octavio Bordón, the ambassador of Argentina to Chile. We have already heard from the Minister of Chile how intimate are now the relationship between the two countries. And now we are going to listen to the Argentine side. Each panelist has from 10 to 15 minutes.
Okay, I will use only 30.
Okay.
Well, first of all, thank Cynthia, for inviting us as former fellow, 1982, Joe, my director in that time, and Abe, that introduced me to the United States as president of the Inter-American Dialogue in that time, in the 80s, 90s. Bueno, yo le agradezco mucho. Voy a poder cumplir el tiempo, aunque no es lo habitual en mí, porque Heraldo me ha ayudado bastante, me ha tomado gran parte de los temas más complejos que yo tenía que haber explicado, sobre todo preocupado porque en su viaje al Caribe no llegara a tiempo hoy, así que había preparado tomar algo. Y la relación es tan intensa históricamente, pero en este momento, que yo recuerdo que cuando le presenté mis credenciales a la presidenta Bachelet, llega un momento en que ella tiene que presentarle su canciller al embajador y me dice, ¿cómo hago ahora para presentarle a su amigo de tantos años, al canciller Muñoz? Y esto no es una realidad nuestra solamente, sino que es una realidad de la intensidad y la profundidad de la relación entre los dos países. Yo, por lo tanto, me voy a concentrar en algunas reflexiones muy breves sobre el contexto de este tema de la integración, no solamente en lo que tiene que ver con trade, con comercio. Uno podría decir que una tendencia después de la Guerra Fría, me acuerdo que aquí en el 92, y también con Arturo Valenzuela en Georgetown en aquel momento, trabajé sobre una idea que era que el muro de Berlín había caído de ambos lados, o sea que había no solamente el desafío respecto del viejo bloque comunista, sino todo el desafío de Occidente, de esta nueva situación, sin su enemigo estratégico, tanto en lo geográfico como en lo ideológico y en el sistema de funcionamiento. Entonces uno diría que después de terminada la Guerra Fría aparecieron algunos elementos vistos desde nuestra región, que uno podría decir, por un lado, desaparecido ese conflicto, una mayor autonomía relativa. Segundo, sobre todo en los últimos años, a partir del siglo XXI, donde como que apareció con otro dinamismo China, creció a casi el 10% versus el 2% de la economía norteamericana, una mayor presencia de China, que en los primeros años claramente significó para países como el nuestro, vendedores de commodities, un alto superávit, muy pocas compras, lo cual se ha revertido bastante en este momento, tanto por las inversiones de China en la región y exportaciones de ciertos sectores industriales que han sido menos dinámicos que el lógico crecimiento de nuestras exportaciones. Y también, quizás en esta idea que el entonces director de la Kennedy School of Government de Harvard, el profesor Joseph Nye, mencionó tantas veces en términos en que las relaciones en esta etapa iban a tener distintos niveles de autonomías y hegemonías bastante más complejos y por lo tanto una situación más policéntrica de la organización de la política y de la situación global. Pero mientras esto ocurría, también esta revolución tecnológica que produjo fuertes cambios no solamente en el funcionamiento de la economía, sino en las comunicaciones y creo también en mucha influencia en el sistema político, esta forma de globalización que estamos viviendo en la sociedad del conocimiento y de la informática, se dieron también algunos cambios económicos que hoy están presentes. Ciertos desacoples no habituales en las economías capitalistas entre los activos financieros y la inversión. El aumento de las desigualdades, que van acompañados incluso de la disminución de la pobreza y de mejores condiciones de vida en muchos lugares del mundo y en nuestra región, sumado a la expansión del sector financiero con estas características que acabo de mencionar, también fueron acompañados de una disminución de la demanda agregada y fundamentalmente en el campo de la relación con las inversiones. E incluso una pregunta que se plantea mucho, un último informe de CEPAL está presente y en algunos trabajos de los especialistas en los temas de alimentos y de commodities, si los commodities en esta etapa de la globalización de alguna manera son más un activo financiero que un hecho estrictamente productivo en su comportamiento económico. Si esto era un poco el contexto global y estos nuevos datos económicos, había algunos elementos que mencionó claramente nuestro amigo el canciller Heraldo Muñoz. Por un lado nos preguntábamos, no hace décadas, hace pocos años, teníamos un escenario que veíamos que un Estados Unidos que venía a la región, claramente el mensaje del presidente Obama, por ejemplo, decir vengo a escucharlos, pero al mismo tiempo que nos venía a escuchar en la región latinoamericana, había un lanzamiento del TTP y también del Tratado Transatlántico. Y uno se preguntaba, ¿y qué va a pasar ahora entonces con las rondas y con la OMC? O sea, estamos ante un post-Bretton Woods en función de este nuevo escenario que de alguna manera en 3 minutos traté de definir. Pero por otra parte, esta mayor presencia de China a nivel global y un crecimiento muy importante, no solamente en el peso político regional, sino global, y en la expectativa económica del Brasil, el surgimiento de los BRICS, que en algún momento hoy casi no hablamos de los BRICS, ¿se dieron cuenta? Llevamos un día y no hemos hablado de los BRICS. Hace 5 años hubiera sido imposible estar aquí mismo y no hablar de los BRICS. Y del drama de algunos de nuestros países de no ser parte de los BRICS. Y también una tendencia que creo que, sin mencionarla, la reflexionó muchísimo nuestro responsable de introducirnos en el tema de hoy, Heraldo, pero también en la mañana de alguna manera el presidente Fernando Enrique Cardoso, que era una tendencia hasta con exponentes que lo veían muy entusiastamente como una América Latina dividida en 2 partes. La América Latina Pacífica, con todas las características que se le daba de tratados de libre comercio, y una Latinoamérica atlántica, como una división de la región entre este y oeste, ya no bajo la Guerra Fría, sino bajo ciertos condicionamientos y funciones de la relación económica con el mundo y de los regímenes políticos más o menos abiertos. Y el crecimiento, de alguna manera, de un grupo de países caracterizados como el ALBA. Bueno, han pasado pocos años y es muy difícil repetir esto. Hoy están discutiendo el NAFTA, hoy está suspendido o sin accionar el TTP y el transatlántico. Hemos vivido el Brexit. Brasil está viviendo y va a salir, como siempre sale Brasil. Ayer contaba el lunes, tú estabas ahí, una anécdota con el presidente Fernando Enrique Cardoso. Estábamos viendo durante la Convención Demócrata, yo era embajador en Estados Unidos, en mi país, en aquel momento, en Boston, y fuimos a ver la final de la Copa América Argentina-Brasil. En esa época no nos ganaba Chile, nos ganaba Brasil la final. Se ha hecho más intensa la relación. Ya antes siempre jugábamos a que Chile ganara, ahora ya no nos causa ninguna gracia que Chile gane, en fútbol nada más. No lo digo porque Heraldo no deja de gastarme todos los días con el fútbol, además de que juega bastante bien al fútbol. Así dicen, por lo menos. Y entonces vamos a ver el partido en un solo lugar, estábamos 4 o 5 personas, Argentina le ganaba 2-1, dominando el partido, faltaba 1 minuto y el presidente que estaba sentado me dice, congratulations. Y le digo, un segundito, presidente, falta 1 minuto y Brasil es Brasil. En ese instante empate de Brasil y nos ganó la final por penales. Entonces, aquellos que creen que la crisis de Brasil es terminal, Brasil es Brasil y para alegría nuestra va a volver antes que después. No te entusiasmes vos. Y se ralentiza un poco la economía china. Sigue creciendo, pero sin el supuesto dinamismo anterior. Los BRICS están más ausentes y ciertamente la ALBA ya no es la ALBA entonces. Pero ¿qué cosas vemos al mismo tiempo que vemos esto? Por un lado, rápidamente, no solamente lo que nos mencionaba el canciller en relación con Chile, sino una rápida relación Canadá-Unión Europea. Otra Japón, Unión Europea. La reunión de Viña del Mar. Macron convocando luego de la reunión del G20 por el COP21 a conversar. Eso es un escenario de que aparecen otros dinamismos nuevos que no desarticulan los pasados, pero están planteando sin confrontaciones, esto es lo nuevo, sin buscar confrontaciones, nuevos escenarios, nuevas respuestas frente a los nuevos escenarios. En este marco, y con esto voy ingresando a la última parte, vemos como estancado, en algunos casos funciona algo, los mecanismos de la región, dentro de la pluralidad de instituciones. Por supuesto, el BID y la Corporación Andina de Fomento, Banco Latinoamericano, sigue funcionando a pleno y muy bien, CEPAL con sus informes también. Pero en el caso de la OEA funcionan temas tradicionales, pero está claro que mayorías importantes no logran tomar decisiones. En contrapartida, lo mismo pasa con la CELAC. UNASUR lleva 9 meses sin secretario general. Esto que obviamente ni nos alegra, nos preocupa, pero al mismo tiempo se da esto que acaba de mencionar en la presentación el canciller. Un gran dinamismo que estaba presente ya desde el 2014, pero que lo que voy a decir es dejando algo muy claro. Yo estoy muy preocupado, pero acepto el ataque que Margarita esta mañana le hizo a mi compatriota y amigo Daniel Sobato, a quien lo acusó de optimista. Yo estoy dispuesto, y él también, a aceptar hasta que nos digan optimistas. Lo que no voy a aceptar que nos acusen de humildes a los argentinos. Hasta lo de optimistas soportamos. Ya lo de humildes es un agravio que no estamos dispuestos a admitir. Entonces, con poca humildad voy a decir, y no soy parte de la actual coalición gobernante en mi país, aunque represento a mi Estado y orgullosamente también a mi gobierno, que esta velocidad se ha dado mucho también en este diálogo entre Mercosur y Alianza del Pacífico, no en la nueva relación, porque no estamos, la película no empieza cuando uno llega, pero le estamos dando un dinamismo en este año y medio, estos 2 años, que no había previamente. Y ha sido muy importante la relación de Argentina y Chile en este dinamismo de este encuentro, en este nuevo contexto entre Alianza del Pacífico y Mercosur, que sé que es muy difícil de entenderla si nos ponemos en trade, aunque estamos trabajando en temas muy específicos que tienen que ver con inversiones, y recuerdo que no solamente hay 30.000 millones de dólares, la mayor inversión de Chile en el exterior, en Brasil, sino 18.000 millones en la República Argentina, que imaginamos después de un tiempo de estancamiento van a volver a crecer en el próximo año. Como también estamos preocupados por ver si podemos tener un mayor nivel de inversiones de los capitales argentinos también en Chile. Estamos trabajando en temas muy específicos y muy concretos en este sentido. Y esto es muy importante porque no es la idea de reemplazar ninguna de las múltiples instituciones que ya tenemos. Como dice un amigo senador de Chile, él ha ido a muchos velorios de instituciones internacionales y a ningún entierro. Por lo tanto, este diálogo no lo hacemos para reemplazar ni para crear ninguna nueva burocracia. Inclusive nos gustaría en UNASUR, cuando vuelva a funcionar, que tenga burocracia mínima y aproveche el Banco Latinoamericano, la Corporación Andina de Fomentos, la CEPAL, la ALADI, todas las instituciones para poder trabajar, sino que es un diálogo de la convergencia en la diversidad, frase lanzada en el gobierno de la presidenta Bachelet y por el canciller Heraldo Muñoz, que nos parece clave en este mundo tan cambiante y exigente. Termino, y no les voy a mostrar los cuadros que traje, que los dejamos acá impresos porque no nos alcanza el tiempo. En esta voluntad de no caer en el optimismo ingenuo de tantas veces, pero tampoco en el pesimismo trágico, sino en un realismo complejo pero optimista, tenemos claro que se acabó la etapa dorada para muchos de los commodities y que por un tiempo no vamos a tener etapa dorada, lo cual no significa recesión global ni imposibilidad de seguir creciendo. Tenemos claro de los 70 el desacople entre el crecimiento nuestro y el crecimiento de las nuevas economías de la zona de Asia y Pacífico. Y en consecuencia tenemos claro que no podemos ni seguir creciendo los que han sido exitosos, ni volver a crecer los que no hemos sido exitosos, sin un cambio de modelo dentro de democracia y sistema de mercado. y fundamentalmente cómo trabajamos mucho para tener más y mejor inversión y mejores puestos de trabajo en este contexto que no va a ser sencillo ni fácil. En eso Argentina, voy a hacer mi pequeño aviso, también está demostrando en su estrategia del actual gobierno de inserción inteligente al mundo una intensa actividad. Tuvimos, ahí Marisol estuvo muy presente, la reunión del World Economic Forum en Buenos Aires. No pensemos ni pensamos que ese éxito nos resuelve todos los problemas de crecimiento, distribución y empleo. Sería un viejo error de un optimismo ingenuo, pero sí que fue importante para nosotros. Segundo, estamos esperando ahora en noviembre, diciembre, la reunión de los ministros de la Organización Mundial de Comercio, y estamos trabajando para noviembre del año que viene, ya en la triada de organización del G20, para la reunión que va a ser en Argentina. Y por supuesto son 3 años, porque recién termina, ahora en diciembre, se adelantó la reunión del G20 en Alemania por el proceso electoral. Estábamos trabajando con la triada, con China y con Alemania, vamos a estar trabajando el año que viene como próxima sede y en el otro año como la anterior sede. Pero ¿cuál es el cambio? Nos queda grande como país si no trabajamos con México y Brasil, que son los otros miembros. Y además el viernes le entregamos a la Cancillería la invitación formal, que estaba el primer momento al Brasil, que en este caso es parte de la construcción de la agenda, no es un invitado para estar sentado, es un invitado para trabajar los 4 países, no en una agenda regional de aislamiento, sino en una agenda regional para ver cómo trabajamos sobre la agenda global con estos desafíos y juntos, pero no solamente nosotros 4, y ahí tiene la importancia también del diálogo Mercosur y Alianza Pacífico, pensando en todos los países de la región, no solamente en esos 8, para tratar de introducir esto en este tremendo desafío que tenemos frente a nosotros y que solo no lo podemos dar. Termino entonces recordando algo que Avi Lowenthal decía hace años, de que hay que evitar la pereza intelectual y política, de ser súper optimista en los momentos de mejor y súper pesimista cuando hay dificultades, y de ahí ese pesimismo, con algo que se habló esta mañana, y que no tiene nada que ver con la economía, aunque tiene mucho que ver con la economía. Y cuando se hablaba del tema de corrupción también. Yo creo que el preocuparnos porque la más democracia genere más república, esto es más balance de poder, y más balance de poder genere más democracia, porque hemos tenido muy mala memoria con republicanos antidemocráticos en la región. Y estamos muy preocupados con gente que en nombre de la democracia no cree en la república y en el balance de poder, o que en nombre de la participación quiere desmerecer la representación, o en nombre de la representación desprecia la participación. Nosotros pensamos que para este desafío de generar más inversiones, mejores puestos de trabajo y reducir las brechas que la región en general, no algunos países tenemos con los países emergentes de otras regiones, en nuestra región al menos, fortalecer más democracia con más república es un tema fundamental para el proceso de integración y de desarrollo económico. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. As the only Brazilian on the panel, I want to deeply thank you, your kind words about Brazil. I also believe, as you, that we are going to emerge, but sometimes we don't. Remember Germany 7-1 in the last World Cup. So we are not so good.
I remember perfect.
I know you do. I'm sure you do.
Fortunately, both.
So now I'm going to give the floor to Marisol Argueta, head of the Latin America World Economic Forum. And I trust that she will give us some more information on the economic side of the integration in the region.
Thank you.
Marisol.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Eric, and all our friends of the Woodrow Wilson Center for inviting me to take part of this great 40th anniversary. It's a pleasure and a great honor to be here this afternoon. New York City was the scenario last week of a variety of events and activities that marked a very important process in the development of the Sustainable Development Agenda. To me, in terms of global integration, this is a very, very important landmark and a great opportunity to align developed countries, developing countries, into one very important global consensus that goes way beyond economics and trade, but really looks at the attaining key important targets for development. And there is a contrast in what we're seeing at that level in the development agenda when we see what is happening in many countries related to the nationalistic rhetoric that is putting some frenos to the whole process of globalization and further integration. But at the same time, this has created a great opportunity for Latin America. We're finally seeing Brazil and Mexico speak about potential agreements. We're very encouraged about the opportunity for Uruguay to sign an agreement with Chile, as Foreign Minister Muñoz mentioned earlier. They're also advancing talks with Mexico, and this is extremely encouraging. The opportunity that is opening, that Mercosur and the Pacific Alliance are also opening, would have been unheard of a year ago. This is, I think, really exciting times, and we need to be actors of that potential integration that is now finally happening in Latin America. Mercosur accounts for over 38% of interregional trade, the Pacific Alliance for about a little more than 50%. This is really, really huge, and it's a tremendous opportunity to unleash the potential of economic growth, domestically led. I think we should not forgo that opportunity, as this is an opportunity also to promote more productivity, promote competitiveness. The World Economic Forum launched yesterday the Global Competitiveness Report. Only 3 Latin American countries made it to the top 50 of that list. Chile remains first in the 33rd position. Costa Rica increased 7 positions, climbing up to the 41st position, and Panama remained stable in the 50th position. This cannot be. Productivity needs to be part of the Latin American agenda. If we are not productive, if we're not competitive, we will not be able to insert a region in the global value chains. The analysis that was made this year by the Global Competitiveness Report is not news for anyone. We're lagging in institutions, as it was reiterated throughout the morning today. We are also lagging in the efficiency of goods and capital markets. We're also lagging in labor market efficiency, and mostly on innovation. And I put an emphasis on innovation because competitiveness will not be driven anymore by the traditional factors that we have measured for the past 20, 30 years. Innovation will be a true driver of change, a true driver of productivity. And I think Latin America has an important potential here with our demographic bonus. I think creating the right ecosystems for the youth of Latin America to be creative, to be able to innovate, and to foster entrepreneurship, we can make a big step for our region's future development. I will not reiterate the very impressive data that the minister and that Jose Octavio shared on the Pacific Alliance on Mercosur, but I would rather focus on a region that should not be forgotten, and that is Central America. Central America should not be away from the patterns of integration and that the southern countries are dynamizing. Central America initiated its integration efforts back in 1951 when the Organization of Central American States was created. That was the first ever attempt of integration in the whole of Latin America. Then in 1960, the Central American Bank for Integration was created. Then we had, now that you opened the door for football, we had the football war with Honduras and El Salvador in 1969. But there was nothing about football in that war. the reality was that that conflict was prompted because of the lack of norms that would regulate the transit of goods and people from El Salvador to Honduras. And that prevented integration to continue until 1979, when we all know the conflicts arose in Latin America. We had a tremendous crisis, and it was only until 1991 when the SICA agreements were launched, and in 93 when the institutional process of the integration system in Central America took force. Who are the Central American nations? You know, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Panama. Belize joined in 2000, and the Dominican Republic in 2004. This is a market of 55 million people. This is a little less than Italy. It's more than Colombia. It's more than Venezuela. It's larger than Peru. So I think Central America stands a chance to be part of this very optimistic process of integration. And I would ask our friends that have the possibility to encourage this the Central American integration to be part of this process, not to forget that very vulnerable region in the center of the Americas. Of course, the Central American and the European Union Association Agreement helped dynamize our integration process, made us achieve some very important political agreements and economic conciliations, and of course the DR CAFTA. That has been an extremely useful tool for Latin American integration. We negotiated together as one bloc. This has opened the opportunity for increased trade. Today, Central America exports $18 billion to the United States. It might be marginal if we compare to the exports with Mexico, but it's a big percentage of our GDP. It's a very big percentage of the total exports of Central America. So keeping DR CAFTA in the agenda, allowing for this bilateral agreement to continue, is extremely important for the survival of the Latin American economies. I think it's very important to introduce maybe new elements that would assist in us becoming more productive, that we would enable more of what is now called the digital markets, the digital economy. I think those variations would be essentially positive for the potential of trade between not only Central America, but the wider region and the wider hemisphere. There is no one single business, be it a large company, a multinational, be it a small business that uses an online platform, that doesn't need a very dynamic, a very agile framework to operate. So we're talking about a very different set of factors for integration, where we need to allow the creation of that environment so that the new, more innovative digital economy can thrive in the hemisphere. I would encourage thinkers and a center as important as the Woodrow Wilson Center to take a forward-looking approach in what could be essential in the new era of the fourth industrial revolution, where very fast changes are happening. Technology, communications are changing our societies, are changing our economies, are changing ourselves. We're moving from an interconnected world to a hyper-connected world, and now we're going to a completely interdependent world. This is where technology and communications are taking us. And for that, we need also to understand how power structures are changing. We also need to understand how environment is being affected by these technological changes and by the whole movement of this fourth industrial revolution. We are the first generation to feel the impact of climate change. And we're the last generation that really has a potential to prevent the ecological global calamity. So I also make a call of action to pay extreme attention to these very important factors that are affecting the world and humanity. I would then say that it's just very relevant to develop a new frame of thinking so that we can adapt these integration models into what the reality is changing us. I don't know if it's new regulations, I don't know if it's more agile protocols, if it's the alignment of payments, systems. There's many, many factors, but we cannot look at integration with the traditional eyes that we have used in the past. This is my call for today. And I wouldn't want to waste the opportunity to thank Cindy and Eric again for all the work that you do to keep Central America in the Washington agenda, especially on security matters, on migration matters. DACA and TPS are fundamental for my country's survival. So any support that you can continue to give in those two very critical areas, it's highly appreciated. And I thank you again. Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Eric. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very interesting your point about Central America. And I want to mention that in Brazil there is much excitement about the possibility of Brazil and Mexico finally get closer.
Yes.
Brazil and Mexico have such complementary economies, and they have been apart for too long, and it may change now with the new geopolitical situation. Thank you. Let's continue with economics. I'm going to give the floor to Carolina Freund, Senior Fellow of the Peterson Institute on International Economics.
So I'm here to talk about NAFTA. And when I was thinking about the title of this panel, Changing Patterns of Regional Integration, I'm going to focus in a bit, not starting with the Cold War, but just with a year ago. A year ago, if we were sitting in this room, we would have been talking about TPP, the mega regionals, TTIP. The direction seemed to be in one direction towards big regional agreements, in part as a way to deal with China, because China was excluded from these big regional agreements, and that would be a way to rewrite the rules so that later, as these agreements expand, that would help China to change some of its behavior. Now the fundamental question is more or less regionalism. Are we going towards more regionalism, or are we actually going towards less? And the NAFTA renegotiation is certainly part of less regional integration. It's not focused, at least from the US perspective, on increasing trade. It's focused on balanced trade, which is very different from increasing trade. And it's actually very contradictory with supply chain formation and supply chain functioning, something that's been a big part of the discussion today. So I think there are three big tensions that have come out of the NAFTA. One is simply because it's integrating very advanced country or countries, including Canada, with a developing country. So there's this north-south kind of tension that comes up because wages are lower in Mexico, because standards are different, et cetera, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit. The other is supply chains. The trade is about supply chains, and in some ways, supply chains seem like trade on steroids, because it's not just about trading goods that are produced more efficiently in the US with goods produced more efficiently in Mexico. It's taking the whole production chain and saying, okay, you produce the wiring harness for the car, which is really labor intensive, and we'll produce the transmission, which is much more technical. And it's about, so within a firm, you see parts moving to different places. And then the third part is, now in trade agreements, in these mega regionals, we're talking about completely new industries, the e-commerce, where should data have to be stored in a country, issues of privacy, et cetera. Standards, which gets people nervous. This was really much bigger in the TTIP than in any other agreement, but this idea of sovereignty and whose standards should apply, and intellectual property, investor rights, et cetera. So these kind of a little bit treading on sovereignty and the right to create laws. So just to say a few words about the North-South integration, NAFTA was supposed to help Mexico converge. I think the real disappointment of NAFTA is that hasn't happened. So if you look at per capita growth, Mexico has grown at the same rate as Canada and the United States. It has not grown faster since NAFTA was started. In some sense, that shows why NAFTA can't have hurt America too much, because if NAFTA didn't get much, it also means we couldn't have lost so much. But anyway, NAFTA has not helped Mexico converge enough. I think you could argue that Mexico would be worse off without NAFTA, and that's mostly due to domestic policies, but Mexico has not converged. The most important thing is that some industries became more competitive, especially autos, because of the supply chains. But perhaps the biggest gain from the NAFTA agreement was a really long period of friendly relations between the US and Mexico. Supply chains, going to my second point about supply chains, they really highlight some of the labor cleavages, because it's not just about some firms developing in one country and threatening others, but you actually see jobs being created by the same firm in another country. So a Ford plant in Mexico. Well, could those jobs have been here? That's the wrong way to think about it, because the fact that there's a Ford plant there producing certain parts and a Ford plant here producing other parts means that the industry itself is more competitive, so we can produce more cars at a lower cost and have more demand for Ford as compared with other producers from Asia or Europe, et cetera. It's also brought investment from those countries into North America because it's such a great place to produce cars. So instead of importing, we're actually producing in the region. So supply chains have been tremendously helped by the regional integration. Probably would have happened to some extent anyway, because trade costs matter a lot in the proximity. But having that trade agreement gives investors a sense of security and has really facilitated that trade, and certain industries have benefited, and that's been good for the US and very good for Mexico as well. And finally, the idea that new industries and new areas create some sovereignty tensions. So one that's been very much in the press is investor-state dispute settlement. And it makes sense to allow companies to protest if regulations change. A foreign company invests in a country, regulations change, and all of a sudden their investment's not viable. That's what it was meant to protect against. But what seems wrong or unfair to people is the idea of a company suing a government, and a foreign company no less. And so these are the kind of issues that I think new trade agreements have to handle and figure out how to handle. Because as an investor, you do want some security, but there seems to be a pushback against that, so perhaps that isn't the way to go. Standards are another one like this, where people may feel their standards from their regulators are better than standards abroad. How do we bring these together? It's more efficient if we all produce according to the same standards. And this is going to be super important as we come into self-driving cars, because imagine if US self-driving cars can't communicate with Japanese self-driving cars, which can't communicate with European self-driving cars. It's not going to be very effective. So these are the kind of issues in the new economy that we live in today and that we have to deal with, and regionalism is a help. So we're now, I think, at a place where we're either moving back from globalization, including regionalism, or governments recognize these challenges and move forward. And I hope that we can find a way to move forward. And actually, for me, as an American, I'm feeling more optimistic listening to the other presenters to see how much is happening in Latin America, because I get so focused on what's happening in the US. But there are ways to deal with the problems that are affecting workers, most of which come from simple structural change and technology. And there are ways of dealing with that with labor adjustment policies, but going backwards on trade isn't the right way. We've experienced a long period of growth and prosperity, and most importantly, peace, as regional integration expanded. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline, for these very deep thoughts about NAFTA and the future of NAFTA. Thank you. And now we are going to listen to the ambassador of Chile to China, Jorge Hein.
Well, good afternoon. In the first place, let me thank the organizer of this meeting, in particular the director of the Latin American program, Cynthia Ansel, for the kind invitation to be here today. I've been associated with the Latin American program for 38 of its 40 years, and I still remember very well when Abe originally hired me to come. We were still at the castle at the time, sharing the space with dinosaurs and all sorts of mummies. Now it's a much bigger and some would say better place than we are here, but the castle had its charms. I'm delighted to be here, even though it has taken a trip half across the world to do so. My takeaway from this morning's panel, which I guess some of you attended, was things are really bad. They are getting worse by the day. If only we were more like the United States and Europe. Well, in my own particular field, which is international relations, I am not quite sure I could say that about Latin America. And what I would like to do, I've been given a short time to speak about a rather broad subject, which is China and Latin America. So what I will do is I will share with you some propositions in a condensed fashion to give you some capsules about how I see the relationship between China and the region. The first proposition that I would like to share with you is that the links that have emerged between Latin America and China in the course of the past 20 years or so signify the most important realignment in the region's international relations in the past 2 centuries, especially for South America. For most of our 200 years of independent history, we looked at the United States and at Western Europe as our international reference points. Yet, in the course of the present century, this has changed dramatically. For Brazil, for Chile, for Peru, China is our #1 trading partner. And for many other countries in the region, it's the #2 trading partner. For my own country, Chile, we export twice as much to China as we do to the United States. 1/4 of all our exports go to China, the highest share of any country in the region. In with China, we have a trade surplus, as opposed to with the US, which we have a trade deficit. In the past 2 years, the financial flows from the Chinese development banks and other banks have been higher to Latin America than those of the World Bank, the IMF, the IDB, and the CAF combined. If that does not signify a major shift in the region's international political economy, I don't know what does. Yet that quintessential fact, the sense I have, is that it has not been yet fully internalized. I keep meeting leading Latin American businessmen and women who say, I've never been to China and have no intention of doing so. And you wonder, you tell yourself, there's something here that doesn't quite mesh with the reality of the numbers and the perceptions that people have. Second proposition. That said, and contrary to the conventional wisdom, these links between China and the region are not new. The rise of China and India in the new century is perhaps the defining fact of our time, and the notion that this only brings us back to a situation ex ante, that is the one obtaining until the late 18th century, when China and India were the world's largest economies, is also quite widespread. What is less well known is that the actual trade between China and Latin America started as far back as in the 16th century, so that the current China-like trade boom repeats a pattern initiated 4.5 centuries ago. Amazing as it may sound, the current flow of metals and agricultural products from the Americas to China, that of all sorts of textiles, from clothing to bed linens to the Americas, had an earlier incarnation in the early days of the Spanish Empire, lasting roughly from 1565 to 1815 for 2.5 centuries, with remarkable duration and continuity. The third proposition is that globalization, in the sense of interlinking at least 4 of the 5 continents, actually started in that process, in what was then known as the El Galeón de Manila, which brought goods from China and other countries in Asia all across the Pacific, all the way to Acapulco, and from there down to Mexico City, Veracruz, and then across to Seville. As Gordon Morales has shown in the recent book, The Silver Way, with the Tornaviaje, that is the return trip from the Americas to Asia across the Pacific, the Manila Galeon provided the missing link in the world's global trade network, accounting for the first time for all maritime routes in both directions. Gigantic ships, 2,000 tons, made their route once a year, generating the sort of trade that would make globalization what it was. For 2.5 centuries, this trade flourished, improving the standard of living of people in the Americas, making Mexico City into the first global city, and contributing to the financial and economic stability of China. Fourth proposition, this pattern of trade, of exchanging raw materials for manufactured products, was established early on and continues to this day, with China selling industrial products and Latin America selling commodities. The real question is, what can be done about it? And the way I see it is that the irony here is the following. Those that are the first to denounce this pattern of trade and saying, China buys copper and iron and soybeans and sells us cars and machinery and so on. And this is bad. Therefore, we shouldn't trade with China. We should trade with other countries that buy products with more value added. Are also the first to denounce industrial policy and say, that cannot be done. Well, I'm sorry, you cannot have it both ways. I mean, either you say you trade with China, and then with the rents of that, you make the most of it and try to diversify your economy. Or you say, well, the market rules, and whatever happens will happen. So it seems to me that's an important point to keep in mind. The fifth proposition is that denouncing trade with China is tantamount to promoting deindustrialization is, again, to put the cart before the horse. For 10 years, from 2003 to 2013, what Kevin Gallagher has called in his book the China boom, the rents that countries, mostly in South America, obtained were huge. You ask yourself, great, this was a great opportunity. What was done with it? No. Social policies were implemented, governments paid down debt, they increased their reserves, all of which is well and good. But how much did the investment rate rise? 1%, from 18% in the 90s to 19% in the first decade of the new century. So you say, again, something doesn't quite jive here. There are these huge rents that come in. What do you do when you have them? And it seems to me to blame China for this to happen is putting somewhere the responsibility on the wrong side. This is something that behooves us, not our trading partners, to do. Sixth proposition, during the China boom, the main driver of Sino-Lac links was trade, which increased, listen to this, 26 times from 2000 to 2013, when it reached $265 billion. Yet, since then, however, as we have heard before, trade has flattened or even fallen. But which are the new drivers? The new drivers are investment in financial cooperation that are now moving to center stage. But these drivers need a more proactive role of government. According to the traditional view, once China ceased to require as much in commodities from the region, it would lose interest in Latin America and go elsewhere. Well, that hasn't happened. Chinese banks are moving with great force into the region. In Chile, we have two now, the China Construction Bank and the Bank of China, and a third one is waiting in the wings. The Chinese policy banks, like China Development Bank and China Exim Bank, are keen to disburse funds for worthy projects. The point I'm trying to make is there are a variety of Chinese entities that are willing and eager to invest in projects, not just national projects, but sub-regional and regional projects in Latin America. But that is a sort of thing that obviously cannot happen by itself. It needs worthy projects. It needs collaboration between our own countries, which is often lacking. And so there's a big challenge there. Seventh proposition, China in Latin America is no longer just about buying oil and iron and copper and soybeans. It's also about development. You may have heard about the One Belt, One Road initiative, a big international development proposal that extends to the global south and to Europe, the formula that has worked well for China, which is build them and they will come. As opposed to the notion that all you have to do is balance your accounts and keep inflation low and countries will grow. China believes that infrastructure and connectivity hold the key to growth and development. That is what China has done, and it is not done too badly. There's one number that you may have seen. From 2011 to 2013, in 3 years, China consumed more cement than the United States did in all of the 20th century. Now, that's a sort of number that gives you an idea of what is going on in China today. Let me give you another number. When President Obama was elected in 2008, he was keen to improve this country's infrastructure, and one of the things he said was, we will work on developing bullet trains. Other countries have bullet trains. Why doesn't the United States have bullet trains? You know how many miles of bullet train railways were built under President Obama? The impression I have is it's zero. In those 8 years, China built 21,000 kilometers worth of railway lines. 60% of all the bullet train railway lines in the world are in China. The next country is Japan with 2,500 kilometers. Now, if that is not an ability to get things done, I don't know what would be. We in Chile, I think this is symptomatic, have been debating on and off with building a 2-kilometer bridge from Puerto Montt to Chiloé. And governments make a decision, the next government comes in, takes it back, and here we are. You know? China is finishing this year a 50-kilometer bridge from Shanghai to Macau and Hong Kong, a $10 billion project. Our great concern is that we will build a white elephant that nobody will use, and therefore it's best not to build it. Our Chinese friends have a different approach, as I said earlier. Build them and they will come. The secret to China's success is not simply about size. It's about a certain mindset, a capacity not just to plan, but to execute. For thousands of years, they've tried to integrate the vast land strewn with rivers, wide rivers, long rivers, and mountains, mostly unsuccessfully. In the past 10 years, with mobile telephony and with bullet trains, they have succeeded in doing so. what would happen if in South America we would have that kind of connectivity? And here we have Chinese banks saying, we will finance them. Chinese companies saying, we will build them. And we can come up with the projects. I mean, I tell myself, there's something wrong here, you know, that can be and should be remedied. One of the things we're doing in Beijing with my colleagues from Brazil and from Argentina is putting the ABC back in play. And we are saying between Brazil, Argentina, and Chile, we export around 20% of all the food that China imports. What about improving our logistics, our ports, our tunnels, our highways? There's one number that struck me the other day. Within the average for the OECD countries, average in logistics and transport costs for export products is around 8%. In Latin America, it's between 13 and 17%. If we're able to cut that back to more reasonable levels with the help of our Chinese friends, much could be done. And there's a very interesting foreign policy issue. Carlos Moneta and his colleagues in Buenos Aires have published a recent book called La Tentación Pragmática. And their argument is the following. China wants to build all these ports and highways and railways and transatlantic tunnels because it's good for them, because it will mean cheaper commodities and cheaper Latin American food for them. Why should this be a priority for us? It shouldn't. And I couldn't disagree more. I mean, either we want to export or we don't. If we want to export, in Asia by 2050 will be half the world's product. Well, then we better get our act together. There are 200 countries out there in the world. And believe me, they all want a piece of China these days. This is what I live with every day. And if our countries do not get their act together and cut the costs and make it possible for us to access the Asian market and the Chinese market in the best fashion that is possible, well, we will not do very well. So, and let me finish here. At this point, the way I see it, in infrastructure, in energy, China has the most advanced technology in solar and wind and has made tremendous progress there. They are proposing interconnecting our energy system, something that is badly needed and would do wonders for our region. In all of these areas, I see a basic convergence of interest between China and Latin America. And some confusion is created by the fact that China often uses the somewhat old-fashioned language of South-South cooperation to refer to matters that correspond quite straightforwardly to its national interest. My own view is that here is a convergence. You don't have to argue that Chinese policy is driven by love for humankind or for the prosperity of Latin America. That is not the case at all. They have their own interests. They have these huge construction companies that have paved over China with cement and now need to pave other parts of the world with cement. Well, we need more cement. Our infrastructure is badly underfunded. Well, why not work together? The whole art and science of foreign policy, the way I see it, rests on aligning your own interests with those of others in such a way that both benefit. In a favorite Chinese expression, win-win cooperation. And it seems to me there are enormous opportunities out there. And if we could integrate South America digitally and physically, the way China has integrated its own mainland in the course of the past decade, otro gallo nos cantaría. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador, for this very original approach to South America-China relationships. There is much fear in Brazil about how aggressive China has been with the Brazilian market.
The word is assertive.
Yeah, maybe unfortunately, but anyway it is. And now let's listen from Landon Loomis, Special Advisor for the Western Hemisphere and Global Economics at the Office of the Vice President, Mike Pence, to check what the current administration of the United States sees the region and the integration of the region and the relations with the U.S.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I'll be brief. I want to thank Cindy and Eric for allowing me to be here on this panel. I've learned a lot today. I've enjoyed listening to each of you speak. I've not met many of you before, but I feel like we have something in common. I came to this job having lived in China for 6 years, so I know what that cement looks like up close and personal. I've lived in Central America for 6 years during the CAFTA negotiations, starting as a Peace Corps volunteer, and I share your real connection, heartfelt connection with that region, and I agree it cannot be forgotten. I just came from Brazil, where I lived for 3 years and experienced the extraordinary transformation and the ability of Brazil to wrestle with all of the multiple challenges it has now and come out with a vision of where it wants to go. I lived in Argentina in 1998 in the go-go days. I worked briefly at Bank of America. And I did my graduate program next door to you at SAIS, and I got to walk past your beautiful building every day. So I feel like I've got something for everybody. I've got something for everybody. Exactly. So I feel very integrated with this panel, and I'm happy to be here. But let me say first that this region is very important to the administration. We've spent a lot of time, I think a lot more time than we thought we might, focusing on issues and using our most valuable asset, which is the time and attention of the president and the vice president, to build relationships, address challenges, and try and state our vision for the different things that are happening here. We've had 5 visitors up to meet the president, more than a dozen phone calls, went with the vice president when he spoke at the conference on prosperity and security in Miami. And we met 4 heads of state, the Northern Triangle and Haiti on that visit. He spoke to the Wilson Center the following week to reprise that trip. Then I organized and traveled with the vice president for his week-long travel to Central and South America, where we visited Colombia, Argentina, Chile, and Panama. And then the next week, I thought after that I was going to get some time off, but nope, we're back on the airplane, back to Miami to meet with Venezuelan diaspora who were here, not because they want to be here, but because they're not welcome in their country as elected judges and mayors. And then, of course, last week was also New York for UNGA, where we gathered with Latin American leaders to discuss Venezuela and other issues. So that's a lot. That's a lot of engagement. And I just want to put that out there to begin with, because maybe a little different than Jose Octavio, me siento humilde y optimista, that I want to push back a little bit on the idea that somehow these relationships are kind of falling by the wayside or falling through our fingers, because my experience in my seat has been somewhat different. And we start from a strong position where the United States has 20 FTAs with the world, and 12 of them are here in this region. That was something that the Vice President repeatedly referenced and mentioned as a very positive, important linkage that the United States and this administration wants to build on. The NAFTA negotiation is, there are going to be points of divergence and points of convergence, but I think as a population, America, and as a government, all 3 parties involved have never been more focused on the questions of what is the value of NAFTA, and that's a soul searching that I think is an opportunity for all of us to remind why it matters. And that discussion is happening in front of all of us on the front pages and of course in Ottawa right now. Trade with the region is huge. We export twice as much to Latin America as we do to China. The Western Hemisphere, two-way trade in the Western Hemisphere is $1.6 trillion. From the United States perspective, it's important, for those of us in the room, we know that this region really matters, but it's in a case that the Vice President, when he was traveling, wanted to make sure he articulated to folks who aren't invited to the Wilson Center 40th anniversary event and don't know how important Latin America is. It's so critical. $366 billion of U.S. exports to Latin America. I don't say that in this group to make it sound like, all we want to do is export, but we need people in the United States to know how important Latin America is. And that's a very convincing and compelling number. In fact, 1/4 of all of our exports go to Latin America. And of that, 70% are manufactured, high quality manufacturers. So that's important. Now, 1/3 of Latin American imports come from the United States, but of course it's a two-way trade. So Latin America exports, I think, more than $400 billion to the United States. This is a win-win relationship that we view as critical. And to your point about supply chains, they're essential. Whether you're talking about autos from Mexico, textiles from Central America, aircraft from Brazil, that integrated supply chain, those are examples that I think we can expand on as we think about the opportunities for regional integration. And then, of course, there's the whole investment piece, which was mentioned. Despite the fact that Chinese investment in Latin America gets a lot of attention because it's growing, it's important to keep it in perspective. It's not remotely the size of U.S. investment in Latin America. We are the largest originator of FDI in Latin America and have been since the 1930s, when the Great Depression broke the link to Europe. We've been in that position ever since. It's a position that we benefit from, that we are grateful for, that we are committed to sustaining. And I think that you can see that in myriad ways, whether it's Telefe's, Viacom's investment in Telefe, or Caterpillar's investments in Panama, or the Vaca Muerta project. I mean, there are many, many, many concrete examples of what that looks like. But it also looks like the 100-year anniversary of the AmCham in Chile, for example. Not only do we have companies that are in these countries, we have company associations that are in those countries organizing together to work and think about policy solutions from within the country, and it creates a relationship that the Chinese don't remotely have. I've made a habit of going to meet the Chinese chambers in Latin American countries, and it does not look like an AmCham. There's not the same institutionality. So those are relationships that have been built up over time that matter and will continue to be prioritized. But what I'd like to do is back up for a second and say, we're talking about integration. Trade, investment, FTAs, all that stuff matters. But what I see, and this is where the optimism comes in a little bit, I'm trying to be realistic, is that there is a convergence, not just in terms of trade, but in terms of values that may not be immediately apparent if all you're doing is reading the headlines of the newspapers. Because the United States and Latin America are converging on core commitments to democracy, to economic integration, and to security cooperation in a way that we really haven't done before. And if you think about the way that the region is working together to maintain pressure on the Maduro regime, to call for the peaceful restoration of democracy in Venezuela, that I don't know that, I'm hard pressed to think of an example like that. And I'm sure we've got experts here who can maybe come up with something, but it's like, when would a Lima group ever meet to have an opinion about a neighbor in this hemisphere that aligns with the U.S. policy? Now, we didn't push that, we didn't promote that. We thought it was very helpful. We were very grateful, and we think it's constructive, and we immediately tried to build on that. But it came because the Latin American countries, on their own, and their own electorates and their own leadership, think it's important. So that kind of convergence, I think, creates an opportunity for a broader concept of what is possible when we really integrate, when we have common values, and those common values dictate policy steps that help reinforce the things we really care about. And I think that that's the process we're in right now. We emphasize those themes of democracy, economic integration, and security cooperation on the Vice President's trip. And now we have the opportunity, multiple opportunities, because of the leadership role that Latin America has pushed for and will play in the next couple of months, whether it's through the WTO, G20, Summit of the Americas. That's a lot of firepower. It's a lot of opportunity to take these concepts and define them further, define them in ways that will benefit all of us, and demonstrate the value proposition of integration, accelerated integration, building on this broad, deep platform. And in my mind, the way I would say it, because I'm looking at it from the point of view of the United States, really state the value proposition of partnership with the U.S. for the region. It's historic, it's geographic, it's not going anywhere. So let's take advantage of this historic opportunity, build on what we have, and make it even better. Thank you.
We have time for questions? Sure. 10 minutes. Okay, so we can have one round of questions.
Fran Hagopian from Harvard, and one of my bosses is the Vice Provost for International Affairs, who happens to be a historian of China. And his mission is, he keeps telling me he wants to give talks in Latin America to help set up Chinese studies centers, because he's wondering how Latin America is going to integrate with and connect with China if there's no capacity within Latin America. There's no history of China. There's no people who speak Mandarin. Is there anywhere in your countries any effort to think about building capacity to deal with Asia other than private sector connections?
Let's hold for the three questions and then we will answer them.
Yeah, I'm Louis Goodman from American University, and Carolyn talked about the importance of regionalism in the context of globalization today. And when you look around the world at different regions, the big countries in those regions are very important for pushing regionalism. Indonesia and ASEAN, Germany in Europe, India and South Asia. There was almost no mention of Brazil here today. What's Brazil doing with respect to regional integration?
Any other question? Ambassador?
Sure. Yes, no, you have put your finger on the right spot. The good news, I'm speaking now for Chile, in 2003, my good friend Sergio Vitar, who was then Minister of Education, put up Chinese as one of the languages to be taught in Chilean schools, and that has gone on. We could do a lot more, but there are quite a number of schools in which Mandarin is being taught in Chile right now. That's one point. Second point, there are 2 Confucius Institutes in Chile, and they are also doing a very good job. But still, I'm fully aware that it's only scratching at the surface. We have to do a lot more. I think we need a lot more also university exchanges. We still don't quite get, at least in Chile, that there are some world-class universities in China. Peking University, Tsinghua, Renmin University, these are ranked in the top 20, top 40 universities in the world. And yet, for many of our students, the idea of doing graduate studies is to come to the United States or go to Europe. So these are big cultural changes that we have to undertake, and we have a big job ahead of us.
I will let Paulo answer the question about Brazil. Since I am a moderator, I'd rather not speak.
Okay. Now, just one thing, keep in mind on Brazil. Brazil is undergoing, this is the most serious, the deepest, the longest crisis Brazil has ever had. I think there is a transformation going on. Well, you heard a bit about the transformation on the rule of law department. There is another one going on. Officials of the Brazilian government, I'm referring to people from the economic, finance minister's team, I'm referring to the deputy foreign minister of Brazil. There is a new message coming from this government, from society, and that is it. The Brazilian economy, in order to recover from this trauma and to go back to economic growth sustainably, has to open up the economy. That is the message. The state capitalism of Brazil, this is the name of what we have there, or had there. This is exhausted. There is a moment that democracy and state capitalism collided in Brazil recently. How we are going to get out of that, it's not clear yet. You have to pick your side here. You believe that Brazil will, or you believe that Brazil will not. We have, Carlos and I and others here, we have a stake on that, okay? So we are going to do the best we can to try to get Brazil to integrate. Mexico is important to Brazil. There is a new dynamic operating in Brazil. It's not clear to most people right now, but as long as we are able to keep combating corruption, it's all about opening up the system in justice, in law enforcement, in the economy, and in politics. Our political system is exhausted, needs to be replaced. How we are going to do this is not completely clear. One advice I would give to you, and reflecting what José Octavio Bordón said, don't bet against Brazil. You are probably going to lose the bet if you do. Thank you.
And about your question, there are dozens of Confucius Institutes in Brazil, and there are maybe, I don't know, dozens of thousands of people learning Mandarin. It's not too much, but the Chinese have been very aggressive with Brazil, aggressive in the good sense. In this.
In the good sense. No, in Argentina it's the same situation. No, it's increasing, but it's more important for us the Brazilian Portuguese. No, but it's important. No, it's not economic issue, but the new regional policy of Argentina since we returned to democracy in 1983, and that was very important because we eliminated the most important hypothesis of conflict with Chile. We overcame the 100% of our border conflicts. We have common activities with the war, with the armed force in between both countries. And with Brazil, we didn't have the risk of to have a war, but the strategic unconfidence. And with President Alfonsín, I had the representation of the opposition in the Congress in the first times of President Alfonsín, but I recognize that was the best international president in Argentina since the 80s, that with President Sarney, they went together to the nuclear powers, and we were able to sign the Tlatelolco. And for us, Chile and Brazil, it's not that we are the more important countries, but that democratic and peaceful coalition is very, very important, not only for us, for the peace process in the region. When we have some trade conflicts on different, we need to remember it. Our ABC is not the trade ABC. It's the strategic ABC looking to South America and the region. It's very important for us. Sorry for I was talking in English. I believe I was talking in English.
Go ahead, Sid, please. We have some more people trying to speak. I don't know if you have time.
Let's just do maybe me and one more. Okay, but it's up to you, but we have to get out of here. But anyway.
She's the boss.
We have another activity tonight, so we have to get moving. Anyway, Landon, I really appreciate your joining us and also reminding us of the importance of the trade and investment relationship between the United States and the countries of the region. I'm not sure if you were in the room when Foreign Minister Heraldo Muñoz gave his talk. I was wondering, and I hope this isn't putting you on the spot in an unfair way, if you can offer your personal opinion or the opinion of your office on the attempts since the U.S. withdrawal from TPP to, led by Chile, but also with the active support of other South American countries, to reconstitute TPP that includes China, that includes Colombia and South Korea and countries that were not part of that. To what extent is that something you welcome, that you think ultimately threatens the United States position in the region? And I was just wondering if you could comment in some way on what has taken place in Latin America since the U.S. withdrawal from TPP.
Okay, Cindy, you finish? Okay, let's take the two last ones, okay? We have two people asking, or three, I don't know.
Thank you. A quick question. John Maisto, retired U.S. diplomat. How much have free trade agreements with the United States contributed to, I think what we've heard today is a certain success in the countries of the Pacific Alliance? And just another comment, to quote Vice President Joe Biden, never vote or select against the United States.
Good.
Hello, my name is Max, and I'm a student at the Elliott School of GW. An open-ended question to whoever would like to answer. Public opinion in Latin America about more intercooperation with China. In my experience in the region, there has often been somewhat of a negative stereotype about the Chinese in the businesses that they're running, and if there is any tie to this changing in the future with more Chinese investment in the region.
Una opinión sobre eso después.
So do you want me to go first, just so I can, on Cindy's question? So I was here for Foreign Minister Muñoz in his comments, and I'll just broadly about, our reaction to TPP. I think we're very neutral. We don't view TPP as an enemy in any way. I think programs like the Pacific Alliance and the effect it's having on Mercosur and the kind of broad effort or contribution it's making to a more open, competitive approach to economic policy is welcome. And so if you look at the language that our leadership, whether it's Secretary Ross or others have made in relation to TPP, there are parts of the agreement we liked, there are parts of the agreement we didn't like, and we decided that it's not the agreement we want at this time, and we pulled out. Now that does not preclude us from supporting other folks who are moving along. So I think that it's certainly not an enemy posture. We're focused on NAFTA. That's our focus right now. We're focused on large bilateral imbalances, as everybody knows from reading the newspapers, and so that's where our focus is. But I think broadly, a lot of our approach that we're bringing to the NAFTA discussion is informed by everything we learned from negotiating TPP. So we're not trying to throw that history out. I think we just decided that was not the right agreement for us at the time.
Sí, un breve comentario sobre el tema de China y la región, por lo menos de Argentina. Nosotros queremos aprender lecciones y estamos muy felices. Él sabe la muy buena relación que tenemos en este momento también con China. Pero les voy a marcar una diferencia para nosotros significativa y con toda honestidad. Anteriormente, porque estábamos casi fuera del mercado, las únicas relaciones de inversión que teníamos era con China y alguna con Rusia, porque eran de Estado a Estado. Entonces tenemos dos grandes obras hidroeléctricas que se van a hacer, porque este gobierno no decidió no hacerlas, pero hemos tenido que discutir porque venían con financiamiento, pero para garantizar mejores condiciones de environment, de medio ambiente, y mejores condiciones y más seguridad en algunos casos. Ahora estamos llamando a una gran licitación para modernizar el sistema de transporte ferroviario sin el cual no puede funcionar logísticamente nuestro comercio, los costos que tú hablabas, y también el transporte de pasajeros en un gran conglomerado urbano que no es México y San Pablo, pero son casi 25 millones de personas. ¿Cuál es la diferencia? Que no van a estar los chinos, van a estar. Con financiamiento van a estar. ¿Cuál es la novedad? Van a competir los japoneses, los alemanes, los norteamericanos, y cada uno tendrá que decir cuánto cuesta, qué ofrece, cuál es el financiamiento y cuál es la integración local posible y eficiente. Estos son para nosotros nuestra visión. Estamos muy felices de tener a China en nuestra relación, pero nosotros no queremos, por no ser capaces de estar en el mercado internacional, de no tener competencia en la relación con China. O sea, no tenemos ninguna preocupación. Inclusive hemos podido negociar muy bien este tema. Yo quería dejar este punto porque es muy, muy importante. No tenemos preocupación con China, tenemos alegría de que China esté en el mercado, pero realmente queremos competencia. Tenemos competencia. Y antes, como no estábamos en el mercado, no podíamos tener ofertas japonesas, porque los japoneses no nos hacían ofertas Estado a Estado, sino empresa a país.
Yes, let me speak to the same question. You are quite right. There is a lag between what has actually happened and the perception of public opinion. But what I've seen in the past couple of years is that this is changing very fast. Let me give you an example. I spoke about bullet trains. what I sense in Chile, there's a great movement to bring back trains to Chile. At some point, we had the best trains in South America. They were dismantled by the military dictatorship. And a lot of people want to have them back. And a lot of them are saying, why can't we have Chinese bullet trains in Chile? From Santiago to Puerto Montt, from Santiago to Valparaiso. So that's one thing. The other thing is, in quite concrete terms, our agriculture has been the fastest growing sector in the economy in the past 3 years. It's been growing, in years, it's been growing 6 to 7% in some years. Why is that? Because of Chinese demand. Last year, Chile was the top exporting country in fruits to China. 1 out of every 4 fruits imported by China by value comes from Chile. Well, people in the countryside realize that. 3, on tourism. People have realized that the Chinese are traveling more and more. They spend more than the Europeans, more than the Americans. Why can't we get a bigger quota? We have a very small share of the Chinese visitors. So these things are changing the old perception that you were saying. Perhaps not fast enough, but they are changing.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's thank the panelists for the much we learned today.
Muy bien.
We have something else.
Un gran panel. Grandes expositores.
Un gran gusto. Muito obrigado.
Sí, yo también. Perdón, que está doblada la tarjeta. Sí, 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 me interesa muchísimo que nos vengas a hablar al foro latinoamericano sobre la perspectiva con China.
Okay, I did on rules.
Sí, perfecto.